Dear friends, thank you very much for joining us tonight. My apologies for starting a little late. We had technical problems. Thank you for your prayers. We have Dr. Stephen Vickers here. It's a blessing to have him. And one of the things that I want to say about him before I start introducing him is that whenever I'm in a jam, I can send a letter to England and he would immediately be there for us. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it. Now, I will start introducing you, and please then go ahead afterward. Dr. Stephen Vickers holds an MA in International Economics and a PhD in International Fisheries Law, a qualified company secretary and a former awarding body CEO. He is one of the two UK-based Transnational Education Experts for ENIC UK. Dr. Vickers will share with us the mysterious and intriguing story of the emperor and the prisoner. Thank you for being with us, Steve. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for giving me the chance. After hearing your description of me, I'm quite impressed. But it's not very. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Now, the Canadians among you, as I said, think the world began in 1867, possibly. The Mexicans among you will see 1867 not as the British North American Act, which sort of brought together Canada as we have it now, apart from Newfoundland, but they'd see it as the end of the Mexican Empire, which is one of the things, of course, which Napoleon the Third created. Whereas Baha'is will see it as the year when Baha'u'llah from Adrianople, wrote his first letters to leaders of various countries. Now, I'm going to share my slides, and I'm going to start halfway through. If 1867 was an interesting year, then, okay, can you see that?
Yes. Would you like to make the first tablet to Napoleon a bit bigger?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I'm just going to decide where to start. The first is 1848. Let's just say two things about 1848. 1848 was quite a year at both ends of our story. It was the year when Napoleon III started the year as a docker and special constable in London, having been in New York before that, and the Jersey Shore. And he finished that year as a member of Parliament in the Second Republic, after the overthrow of King Louis Philippe. So lots of things happened in 1848, and not only in Paris, but in Berlin, Budapest, Rome, Vienna. There were liberal and nationalist risings. The Pope, who was then, of course, king of quite an extensive papal states, lost his kingship of Rome in 1848 to the Italian nationalists, and Napoleon III put him back. It was also an interesting year from our end of the story as Baha'is. I know we're not all Baha'is, but those of us that are will know that in 1848, many hundreds of thousands of people were becoming followers of the Bab. The Bab had foretold, of course, that he whom God shall make manifest would arise and bring about a new world. And he said this would happen in the year 19 from the year of his own declaration, which 1844, which makes 1863.
Steve, I'm sorry, because we are recording can you kindly press start a slideshow? So,
Okay, I don't want to go right
okay,
away,
you got it. You got it. Thank you. I apologize.
but
That's
I
it.
didn't want to go right from the start because
Yeah, perfect.
we've lost time, though, you see. But the
Perfect.
slides is fine, is it?
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just tell you something quickly about Napoleon III then. Born Paris, France, died Chislehurst, Kent in Britain, and reburied in Farnborough, Hampshire. And in fact, now President Macron has asked that he and his wife and children's remains be returned to Paris to be buried at Les Invalides alongside his uncle. He was the third son of Louis Bonaparte, King of Holland, and Hortense de Beauharnais, stepdaughter of his uncle, the famous Napoleon. So Hortense was therefore simultaneously Napoleon I's stepdaughter and Napoleon I's sister-in-law. So we'd say it wasn't so much a family tree as a kind of bush. But anyway, 1848, interesting things happening all over Europe. And this helped to bring Napoleon III to his position as emperor. He didn't actually get there till 1852, but also within the faith, you get Badasht, you get the various uprisings, Neyri's upheaval, etc. Persecution of Barbers begins in earnest. And of course, the Blessed Beauty Baha'u'llah is imprisoned in that year. I'm rushing through this first bit because I don't want to, I want to get back on track in time. Of course, he was then 10 years in exile from 1853 in Iraq and in Baghdad and Kurdistan. And then after 6 more years, he was summoned to Constantinople. And then he was passed to Edirne. And as he left Baghdad, he declared that he was this, he whom God shall make manifest in 1863. You've all seen, most of you have seen this map of Baha'u'llah's journeys. Despite their invitation to Baha'u'llah, the chief ministers refused to meet him. He was gaining followers in Constantinople, so he was forcibly exiled again to this Edirne. And this is where he started writing to monarchs. He called it the land of mystery. And in a letter to one of the Sultan's chief ministers, he said that this land would pass out of the hands of the king. And of course, a decade later, all of the Turkish lands to the north and west of the city gained their independence. And over the following 40 years, the whole area was fought over. Only after the abdication of the last Ottoman Sultan was Edirne returned to Turkey, but the others were all lost. And Baha'u'llah was then shipped to the prison city of Akka. Now, again, there's a strange link here in that Napoleon I, who was considered really the greatest general since Genghis Khan, had been unable to take Akka because of the thickness of its walls built by the Crusaders. And Baha'u'llah called this the most great prison. From Edirne, Baha'u'llah wrote to the Shah, the Sultan, and the Ottoman chief minister. He also wrote a letter to Napoleon III in either 1866 or 67, according to the Wilmette Institute. Shoghi Effendi summarizes the contents of this letter thus. To Napoleon III, Baha'u'llah addressed a specific tablet, which was forwarded through one of the French ministers to the emperor, in which he dwelt on the sufferings endured by himself and his followers, avowed their innocence, reminded him, that's Napoleon III, of his true pronouncements on behalf of the oppressed and the helpless, and desiring to test the sincerity of his motives, called upon him to inquire into the condition of such as have been wronged extend his care to the weak, and look upon him and his fellow exiles with the eye of loving kindness. Now, you might wonder, what is this when Napoleon III has set himself up as protector of the weak? He was always interfering in other people's kingdoms, and he had specifically announced that he and the French were the protectors of the oppressed within the Ottoman and Russian empires. And it is rumored, but we have no way of knowing, that Napoleon III, on receiving this letter, said, "If this man is God, I am two gods." I don't know, but he certainly rejected it dismissively. But what's in the letter in detail, no idea. The question which is so fascinating is, how did a prisoner in the Ottomans' toughest prison write to the kings and rulers of the world? Because, of course, though he started in Edirne, most of these letters were in 68, 69, one or two, 70 and 71. But he didn't just write to them, he commented upon their motivation and sometimes rebuked them. Well, this is because the governors kept going soft on him. Salah Jawah, who was a companion of Shoghi Effendi since their boyhood, put it thus. Abdul-Baha, he said, was a prisoner, but he was the king of Akka. And the same was seemingly even more true of Baha'u'llah, because the governors went soft on him. They let him do things which they had been told they couldn't. Now, you may come back and you say, why didn't you write to rulers in Asia and Africa? Remember that by 1885, only a few places, Ethiopia, Japan, Thailand, and Korea, in Asia and Africa, were still independent, and Persia itself, of course. And Persia and Turkey were the two Asian countries he wrote to. Even China was deeply divided and had lots of European enclaves. The few recipients he wrote to could have changed the world at this point. And those of you who have studied the letters will know that Baha'u'llah asks them to do so. The prison city of Akka. When they arrived at Akka, the inhabitants gathered to jeer at the prisoners. Mrs. Slee, would you care to read the spoken words of Bahi Khanum, please, on this? Shala and Anise? Can you see it? No, okay.
Can I read it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
The green.
The green. Okay. All the townspeople had assembled to see the arrival of the prisoners, having been told that we were infidels, criminals, and sowers of sedition. The attitude of the crowd was threatening. Their yelling of curse and exhortations filled us with fresh misery. We knew not what the fate of our party, the friends, and ourselves would be. We were taken to the old fortress of Akka, where we were crowded together. There was no air. A small quantity of very bad coarse bread was provided. We were unable to get fresh water to drink. Our sufferings were not diminished. Then an epidemic of typhoid broke out. Nearly all became ill.
Yes, so here we are. From outside, it looks as though Baha'u'llah and his family and companions have been thrown into what a Quebecois would call an oubliette, a place to be forgotten. They would say this is the lowest point. We dealt with him, locked him in this. And of course, even the ordinary, decent, common criminals of Akka feel superior to these heretics. I may be a murderer, but at least I'm not a heretic. So they're perfectly happy to arrive and throw things at the exiles. But Baha'u'llah says that he heard, soon will all that dwell on earth be enlisted under these banners. So here he is in this terrible place. And yet from this terrible place, he continues to write to leading members. Those of you who've been on pilgrimage will know the citadel here. The leading members of the world. The nature of these letters: take counsel together, reduce armaments, move the world towards peace. We're coming to Napoleon III, don't we? It's not sufficient for us to ask, what did Baha'u'llah specifically say to Napoleon III? Because all of these letters have elements that are specific to the recipient. And in the case of Napoleon III, Baha'u'llah tells him, I know you thought that you said you thought this, but actually you didn't think that, you thought this. In other words, he says that he's reading Napoleon III's mind effectively. But the letter is not just for the recipient. Each of these letters are masterpieces. And this one includes theology, advices on creating world peace, as well as this specific information. The advice to make a better world together is given to most monarchs because their collective will and their collective action is the only way we'll get a better world at the time. The important thing to remember is that he was kind and polite, even though to Napoleon III and some of the others, he included an element of criticism. Notice this. He says to the French emperor, it is not our wish to address the words of condemnation out of regard for the dignity we conferred upon thee in this mortal life. So even though Napoleon III looks to be the self-made emperor, in fact, Baha'u'llah says, God put you in this position. God conferred this dignity upon you, and we don't wish to be condemning of you. So he's not impolite to these monarchs. He says to the Shah of Persia, whom of course he would know from his childhood, and who would know him from his childhood, those around you love you for their own interest. I love you for yourself. Now, have a quick look at the map here. You can see France is a bit smaller. You can see the Papal States there. The Pope has a nice little country. You will see that lots of the areas that were later incorporated to the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union are semi-independent. You can see the Ottoman Empire doesn't really control much of the desert of Saudi Arabia. You can see that France has taken the coast of Algeria and defines it as part of France, not just a colony, but part of France. And you can see the semi-independent parts of the Ottoman Empire. Already the Ottoman Empire is beginning to fall to bits. You can see Greece has its independence. You can see Germany is in lots of little bits, and so on. You can see Norway is part of Sweden. So it's very different. Ireland is part of Britain. Okay, now let's come to Napoleon III himself. Why is he such an enigma? He had a difficult childhood. His parents disliked each other. And of course, once the Russians, the Austrians, the British, the Prussians ganged up together against Napoleon I, they had to flee from Holland. His father, Louis, King of Holland. His whole life, he wanted to be an emperor like his uncle, Napoleon the Great, who in fact, of course, was Corsican, and Corsica had only been in French rather than Italian, rather than Genoese for about 4 years when Napoleon was born. So we're forgetting that Napoleon I was actually of Italian origin, and he was teased for his voice and his accents to start with. But Napoleon I had this strange mixture in his approach. He embraced the liberal modernist side of the French Revolution, and yet he was very conservative in others, bringing back monarchy and so on. And he put it this way: I was a Muslim in Egypt. I shall be a Catholic in France. So religion is a an element of politics. It's not something you really believe in, it's something you pretend to believe in. And he declared himself Napoleon I, Emperor of the French in 1804. That is important because he doesn't call himself Emperor of France. He is a man of the people. He just happens to be the emperor. And Napoleon III wants to be like this. He wants to be everybody's friend as well as everybody's boss. And that's why it's difficult. Here's Napoleon insulting the Pope by taking the crown from the Pope and putting it on his own head. Okay, what happens to Napoleon III? He becomes an exile. Napoleon I, his uncle, was a hero in Italy, Poland, and Germany because he had helped them liberate them from the Austrians, helped liberate the Poles from the Russians. And Louis Napoleon, as he's called, ultimately Napoleon III, becomes an Italian nationalist with his brother. And they fought against the Austrians. He then invaded France with a few soldiers and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He escaped to the US, where he became a dock worker, a longshoreman. And he also became a runner. He was quite a short man, even though his pictures all show him to be big and tall. He actually was a very good runner. So he used to challenge people to bets. And people would accept the bets, thinking I could easily run faster than this little guy. And then he would win money. But with the year of revolutions, 1848, he thought, this is my chance to get back to France. So he moved to become a policeman in London. And the minute the riots drove out the Bourbon king, Louis Philippe, who had succeeded the French Bourbons, the main Bourbon line in 1830, he went to Paris. He stood for election as president of France. He received 70 or 80% of the vote because he had name recognition. Bear in mind, most people couldn't read. So, they didn't know much, but they heard the name Bonaparte, Napoleon, they knew it. So then in 1852, he carried out a military coup, arrested most of the leading members of the parliament, and declared himself Emperor of the French, just like his uncle. Now, this is what Mark Twain says about him. Would anyone like to read Mark Twain, please?
Excuse me, a quick question here. Sorry, AJ here. I'm just new. Is there any way I can get access to these slides? I'm trying to share this with my fellow classmates. I have like a group instruction. I need submit this to a teacher just to prove that I was in a Zoom meeting about this. Can you email this to me, or is that not possible? I think this is great material, but I would just like a copy of that if possible.
I'll make sure that everybody gets this stuff, but I can't give you a copy of it now because it's very unsophisticated. This is from Mark Twain's The Innocents Abroad. Can you see it, James?
Yes, I can see it clearly. Thank you. But it didn't
I'll make sure you will get this if you want to.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just JJ. Thank you.
Sure.
Surrounded by shouting thousands, by military pomp, by the splendors of his capital city, and accompanied by kings and princes, this is the man who was sneered at and reviled and called bastard. Yet who was dreaming of a crown and an empire all the while? Who was driven into exile but carried his dreams with him? Who associated with the common herd in America and ran foot races for a wager, but still sat upon a throne in fancy? Who kept his faithful watch and walked his weary beat, a common policeman of London, but dreamed the while of coming night, when he should tread the long corridors of the
Tuileries. Carry on.
All the world, yet went on dreaming of coronations and splendid pageants as before, who lay a forgotten captive in the dungeons of Ham, and still schemed and planned and pondered over future glory and future power. President of France at last, a coup d'etat, and surrounded by applauding armies, welcomed by thunders of cannon, He mounts a throne and waves before an astounded world the scepter of a mighty empire. Who talks of the marvels of fiction? Who speaks of the wonders of romance? Who prates of the tame achievements of Aladdin?
Wonderfully put, thank you. If you've not read Twain's The Innocents Abroad, it's well worth doing, because he knows and met so many, or at least saw so many of these people to whom Baha'u'llah wrote. And Mark Twain quite admires Napoleon III. He is the archetypal Connecticut Yankee, if you wish, a self-made man. He's a guy who made himself emperor of probably the most powerful country in the world at the time from being a dock worker. That to Twain was pretty impressive, but he could see that he had kind of suspicions that he was looking around for the people cheering. Okay, here we go. We got a self-made emperor. Look how smart he looks when painted by a well-paid fawning court painter. He's got the job, he's got the uniform, he's got the horse. All he needs now is a royal wife. Okay, so what does he do? A Spanish princess with an Irish touch thrown in. And this is she, the Empress Eugenie, whose full name is, you'll forgive me if I'm not pronouncing the Spanish properly, Donna Maria Eugenia Ignacia Augustina de Palafox y Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick is an island, of course. And she's Emperor of France, and this is their summer palace at Biarritz. Those of you who are used to the idea of celebrity these days will know that anyone can be famous for 5 minutes, as Warhol put it. But in the time when there was no TV, there was no film, these celebrities really were celebrities. And in Roman times, and right the way up to the life of Empress Eugenie, the only way you could make a purple garment was by using one of two particular shellfish that grow in the Eastern Mediterranean. And you need thousands of shellfish to make one purple garment. This is why the Romans limited wearing of even Persian edged togas to the most famous people. But in the 1870s, of course, and 1860s, coal tar dyes were developed by Perkins and then mass-produced by German companies. And she was the first famous person to get a purple dress. And the following year, half of all the society women in Europe and in North America wore purple to as many events as they could. You know, we have no comparable person now, I don't think. Okay. Okay. Now, this is his further description. A long-bodied, short-legged man, fiercely moustached, old, wrinkled, with eyes half closed, and such a deep, crafty, scheming expression about them. Napoleon bowing ever so gently to the loud plaudits and watching everything and everybody with his cat eyes from under his depressed hat brim, as if to discover any signs that those cheers were not heartfelt and cordial. He did wonders for France, rebuilt Paris with big, broad boulevards, which before previous monarchs had been brought down by barricades. He built these big, broad boulevards where you couldn't put a barricade. He quadrupled the railway network, encouraged new industries. By 1870, France was the world's second biggest economy. He expanded the powers of the legislature. And in 1870, which he didn't manage to do it because of the Franco-Prussian War and him losing his throne, he was planning all-male suffrage, which you had in America, but no other country really had that. He introduced the right to strike. He wrote a book about how to get rid of poverty. He encouraged the development of affordable food for the poor, like margarine. Introduced sewerage network. So the important thing to realize is that Napoleon III is a very complex person. A lot of stuff he does is very good, but a lot of stuff he does really isn't good at all. And there we go. Above all, he was a meddler. If he was a Batman baddie, he wouldn't be called the Joker or the Riddler. He'd be called the meddler. He rearmed France. He was always fiddling in other people's business. He helped the Italian nationalists chuck the Austrians out of Lombardy in 1859 and out of Venetia in 1866. But in exchange, he made them give Savoy and Nice, parts of Italy, to France. He also drove the same Italian nationalists that he'd encouraged out of Rome to put the Pope back into his good books. He went along with Britain and Turkey to fight Russia in the Crimean War. He invaded Mexico in 1861 and put the Austrian Prince Maximilian von Habsburg as Emperor of Mexico. But in 1865, after April, of course, the surrender of the Confederacy, the President Andrew Johnson basically said to the French, get your troops out of Mexico or you're for it. Napoleon III, not wanting to get in trouble with the US, pulled his troops out of Mexico and left Maximilian von Habsburg, the son of the Austrian emperor, to be shot, executed by the Mexicans. He bullied the Copts, the Orthodox, the Muslim authorities, saying that France and Catholics should be custodians of the holy place in Jerusalem. He was obsessed with being popular. He won 75% of the vote in a plebiscite in 1870, but he still picked a war with Prussia that year just to make himself even more popular. Okay, here's Maximilian von Habsburg, this famous picture of him being executed. Now, Baha'u'llah's second letter to Emperor Napoleon III is written sometime between August 1868 and October 1870. 27 paragraphs, almost twice the length of the tablet to Queen Victoria, but only a third of the length of the tablet to the Shah. We're not going to read in this little chat the whole of the letter, but if you haven't read it, I'm sure you all have, mostly have, but if you haven't, have a look at it. It's brilliant. It's reproduced in the Summons to the Lord of Hosts. The first 6 paragraphs address Napoleon as the foremost monarch of Christianity. He talks about the greatness of this day. He shows how prophecies of Moses and of Christ have spoken of him and this day. He talks about the abolition of monasticism and priesthood. And he says, why have I come? We've come to quicken the world and unify its peoples and gather all men around this table, which have been sent down from heaven. The voice of the burning bush. What's that a reference to? Who's that a reference to? The voice of the burning bush is?
Moses.
Moses.
Very good. You can stay behind and clean the erasers. Yes, thank you. And he says, consider how a Pharisee who had worshipped God for 70 years repudiated the Son, repudiated Jesus when he appeared, whereas one who had committed adultery gained admittance into the kingdom. So he's basically going through to show that the same things, you have a chance now, people have a chance to grasp with both hands this new revelation as they did in the time of Moses, as they did in the times of Christ. He also says, don't seclude yourself in churches and cloisters. We don't need monks anymore. And he says the fact that Jesus didn't marry is not, or the fact that he had no home, is not what makes him great. His holiness consists not in the things you believed and imagined. It's what he taught. Now he starts with the 7th paragraph, talking specifically to Napoleon III. He basically says, you said to the Tsar of Russia, you were interfering in his empire because you were concerned about people he had oppressed. But we testify that that which wakened thee was not their cry, but their promptings of their own passions. For we tested thee, and we found thee wanting. Notice this last bit is the writing on the wall in the book of Daniel, the Old Testament, to the Babylonian king Belshazzar. We have tested you and found you wanting. And Napoleon III would have known this. He would have had a good Catholic education. He would realize that this was a biblical reference. He now talks about the importance of courtesy. And he said, if you'd been sincere in your words, you wouldn't have cast behind your back the book of God. So in other words, we sent you this other letter, you ignored it. We've tested you with this, we proved thee through it, and found thee other than that which thou didst profess. We sent you this letter, and you were not the person you said you were. He nevertheless says it's conditional fate. Ere long, all that thou possessest will perish, and the kingdom will remain unto God, thy Lord, and the Lord of the fathers of old. It behoveth thee not to conduct thine affairs according to the dictates of thy desires. Now, Aniela, you read so beautifully. Could you read the green bits here, please? With feeling.
For what thou hast done, thy kingdom shall be thrown into confusion, and thine empire shall pass from thine hands. Commotions shall seize all the people in that land, unless thou arisest to help this cause, and followeth him who is the Spirit of God in this, the straight path.
Yeah. We have available to us in library system, British library system, of course, what in North America is generally called the London Times, we call the Times. So you can read all the newspapers at the time. The idea that Napoleon III would lose his throne was not at all viewed as being a probability. Or the London Times are saying, okay, there's going to be this war between France and Prussia. The Prussians will lose, the French will win hands down. They've got twice the army. And so nobody believed that Napoleon III was going to lose his throne, let alone himself. So probably when he saw this letter, he probably thought again, yes, even if he did, whether he said it or not, if this man is of God, I am two gods, because he really thought he was top of the tree, and everybody else thought he was top of the tree as well. Now, he then addresses all kings. Know of a truth that your subjects are God's trust among you. Watch ye therefore over them as you watch over your own selves. Beware that you allow not wolves to become the shepherds of the flock, or pride and conceit to deter you from turning unto the poor and the desolate. Abandon thy palaces to the people of the graves, and thine empire to whosoever desireth it, and turn then unto the kingdom. Here there are at least two interesting links to other letters that he wrote. When he writes to the Ottoman Sultan, Abdulaziz, he says, it's not Abdulaziz, it's the one before. Anyway, he says to him there, don't put these bozos to run your affairs. A man who is not loyal to his God will not be loyal to his king. And this is the same. Beware that you allow not wolves to become the shepherds of the fold. Be careful whom you put as your chief ministers. And in abandon thy palaces, this is exactly one of the things he says to Pope Pius IX. Pio no, as you know, the Pope that always says no to every reform. Pio no, Pius IX. Abandon your kingdom unto the kings. He says to the Pope, how come you know, Jesus didn't dwell in palaces, but you've got so many. So these two things come out elsewhere. In the 17th, there were many, many things which are of general value to human beings. Should your words, O people, be at variance with your deeds, etc. Shed not the blood of anyone, neither judge anyone unjustly. They that commit disorders in the land, etc. So this is all about what God wants people to do. In the 18th, he talks about the importance of an upright and praiseworthy character. Without it, he can never hope to influence his hearers. Without a praiseworthy character, you can't influence your hearers. Deal not treacherously with the substance of your neighbor. Withhold not from the poor the things given unto you by God through his grace. So again, he's talking about human character. He's not really talking to Napoleon III. He's talking to everybody through this letter. Now, in the 20th paragraph, he talks about the nature of teaching. We have ordained that our cause be taught through the power of utterance. Beware lest you dispute idly with anyone. If any of you have not had the opportunity to look at what the Utterance Project has done, where you can access principal tablets of Baha'u'llah read in their original Arabic or Persian, but with English subtitles. Utterly brilliant. And I never quite understood what the word utterance was about. But the ability of the ocean of his words to come alive, even if, like me, you don't speak Arabic. The fact that so many things that in English do not rhyme, the long healing prayer, rhyme in Arabic. And it's another confirmation that they do so. This power of utterance, our cause be taught through the power of utterance. No swords, no real swords, just the swords of wisdom and utterance. The sword of wisdom is hotter than summer heat and sharper than blades of steel. So he's talking about how to teach this cause. 21st, he's talking about virtues. If you become aware of a sin committed by other, conceal it. And this one is the beginning of it, very like one of the hidden words. If you encounter one who is poor, treat him not disdainfully and be truthful. Then the 22nd paragraph, again, he's not talking to Napoleon III in particular, he's talking to everybody. Give ear, O peoples of the earth, unto that which the pen of the Lord of all nations commandeth you. The dispensations of the past have attained their highest, their final consummation in the law that has branched out from the most great ocean. Regard ye the world as a man's body, which is afflicted with diverse ailments. Very similar to a famous Roman orator explaining the same thing. All the bits of the body have to work together. Okay, so he gets a very rapid demotion. Baha'u'llah said to him, for what thou hast done, thy kingdom shall be thrown into confusion, and thine empire shall pass from thy hands as a punishment for that which thou hast wrought. France and Prussia, where Prussia was, of course, the biggest German state at the time, fell out over the Spanish throne, And Napoleon III declared war on Prussia because his advisors said, you'll become really as popular as your uncle if you beat the Prussians. And as I said, you read the Times articles, everybody said France would win the war easily. No such luck. The other German states backed Prussia. The Germans mobilized much more quickly because they had better railways, better science, outmaneuvered them. The emperor was surrounded and captured at Sedan in northwest France. He was spat at by his own soldiers who blamed him. He then spent a year living in Leamington Spa, which is about 40 miles north of here. Those of you who, some of you will have probably seen the teaching books published by the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Warwick. The Baha'is of Warwick and Leamington Spa and Warwick are twin towns, I suppose like Minneapolis, St. Paul, but much smaller. And so there's a house there with a blue plaque where Napoleon and Eugenie lived. He then moved to Chislehurst in Kent and in southeast England and passed away in 1873. Now, Eugenie thought that Napoleon III was common. For an emperor, he wasn't very polite. His eating habits were ghastly. You know, he slobbered all over the place. He didn't use his cutlery nicely. And of course, she was brought up as a Spanish duchess. And so she was very particular. And she thought he was messy and, for an emperor, a bit rough around the edges. But of course, he'd spent years in jail. He'd spent years as a docker and so on. But the minute he was dead, he became a secular saint. And she created an abbey in Farnborough, in Hampshire, and dedicated her life to kind of lifting his image. As I said, France has now asked for his remains to go to Paris. And I think that's keeping. It's very sad, actually, because their only son, the Prince Imperial, was killed in 1879 in the Zulu War while serving the British Army. And so Eugenie lived to see, if you like, the whole house of the Bonapartes extinguished. And she was heartbroken. Not only was she heartbroken, but Queen Victoria was heartbroken, even though the British had, of course, fought against Napoleon's uncle, Napoleon III's uncle, Napoleon I. Nonetheless, to Queen Victoria, the Bonapartes were better than a republic. So she didn't like the French Third Republic, and she treated Eugenie like she was an empress in exile. She treated the Prince Imperial really carefully. And when he was sent to Zululand, she basically gave instructions to the general, whatever you do, don't let him get in harm's way. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, and they were ambushed by some Zulus and he was killed. So from that occurrence in 1870, all things happened, many things happened, and the whole map of Europe changed. Germany becomes a single country. The Austro-Hungarian Empire leaves Italy. Italy becomes a single country. The king, the Pope, has lost his kingdom, exactly as Baha'u'llah said he would. And this was because of the fall of Napoleon III. He was only held there in Rome by the French troops that Napoleon III had sent to keep him there. And when they were withdrawn to fight the Prussians, the Italian nationalists walked in, and the Pope became just a spiritual leader and no longer a king. Now, many of you will come back and say, come on, Vickers, there's still a Vatican City. Well, there is, but that didn't develop until 1929, when Mussolini, like Napoleon III, wanted to become friends with the Pope, so he gave him his own country. Now, I think I've spoken enough, with being late as well, but I just want to say one last thing. First of all, read these letters, please, if you haven't, because there's so much in them. And there's so much in them that would please not only those people, who like miracles, if you like, where the Blessed Beauty says, going to lose your throne, just happens just like that. But also, there were messages to all of us in there. And even the King of Prussia, who then becomes the big proud man after the fall of Napoleon III, doesn't get away with it completely scot-free. Here he is, because Baha'u'llah then writes to him and says, do you remember the one whose power transcended thy power and whose station excelled thy station? Where is he? Anyone want to guess who he means? He means Napoleon III. Here's the King of Prussia now thinks he's top dog, having defeated Napoleon III. And Baha'u'llah says, God, he cast the tablet of God behind him, and God got rid of Napoleon III, not you. So be careful, you are humble. And he issues these warnings that we all know. O banks of the Rhine, we have seen you covered with gore, inasmuch as the swords of retribution were drawn against you, and you shall have another turn. And we hear the lamentations of Berlin, though she be together in conspicuous glory. The older ones among you, of course, will remember that Berlin was divided into two different countries. There are other places which divided into different countries. In Famagusta, for instance, where covenant breakers lived, is divided between Turkey and Cyprus. Nicosia divided between Turkey and Cyprus. But Baha'u'llah puts these reminders, these prophecies, into this letter too. So you've been very patient. Well, you pretended to be, and I'm grateful for that. So I am sorry that I was late. I must apologize on behalf of my internet provider. And I haven't gone through all these slides, but you put up with enough. So thank you.
Thank you so very, very much, Dr. Vickers. I have never had
Stephen, please.
Stephen, it's being recorded, Stephen. But
My daughter used to say to her friends, school friends, he's not a real doctor, he's just a fish doctor. Meaning he can't cure you. What use is a doctor that can't cure you?
Oh,
give our love to your daughter.
I certainly will. She's now in Brussels. She's head lawyer for UNICEF for the whole world. So they asked her to come to New York, and she said, couldn't I stay in Brussels? Because before that she was Britain's lawyer to the EU, but she was so embarrassed by Brexit, Britain leaving the EU, that she decided can't do this anymore and went to the UN. So, but she's running the legal system for UNICEF from Brussels, because basically they have one lawyer in lots of different countries, so you could run it from anywhere, really.
That's wonderful. Like father, like daughter. Now, Stephen, usually we get questions right now, but I wanted to say that a few of the friends have asked about how they can have access to the recording of this. If you go on the internet, the Baha'is of Oakville, I have already posted that twice here. The Baha'is of Oakville, you go on the Baha'is of Oakville and there's a heading for Fireside. This will be uploaded in few days. Friends, are there any questions? Please feel free to ask questions.
Me too.
You know, Stephen,
Yes,
yes, go ahead.
Dr. Vickers, thank you so much. This was so enlightening. The things we really did not know about the character of Napoleon III and the significance of this tablet. Do we know how these tablets got to the emperor, and also who translated it to French?
Est-ce que vous parlez français?
Pardon me?
No, okay.
I don't think so.
I thought being Canadian, you might be a French speaker. Well, there's a Canadian chap called Jan Yashin, who now lives in Paris, Jasion, and he has written some phenomenally detailed analyses of the first mention of the Baha'i faith in every American state, every Canadian province, every country, and so on. And he's also written some stuff about these tablets and how they got translated. And basically, all the big countries had a consul, sometimes 3 consuls. Generally, they had the cities of Damascus, Jerusalem, and Haifa were the places where countries had consuls. Not ambassadors, notice, but consuls. So sometimes there were ambassadors, but the ambassador to the Ottoman Empire would be Constantinople. So Britain, for instance, had a consul in Damascus, a consul in Haifa, and a consul in Jerusalem. And these letters, certainly the second one, the first one obviously was sent from Edirne, and I don't know which route it took, but normally speaking, when somebody was allowed in to see the Blessed Beauty, and remember, some of them just were able to walk in past the guards without the guards saying anything, he would give them a tablet if it was going somewhere, and he'd say, take it to so-and-so, or you'll know where to take it. But in these cases, he would have either entrusted it to a pilgrim or to more probably a more trusted believer, and we're not quite sure. Jan Yashin is probably sure, but I haven't read his stuff with quite the detail that I should. When I'm an old man, I'll do that. So he explains that this was taken to the French consul in Haifa, I think, from Akka. And routinely, one of the things they would do in the consulate is translate letters into French to send to France in a diplomatic bag. Now to us, that sounds like a lot of work. But bear in mind the amount of diplomatic correspondence was much, much less. We have in the Public Record Office here in Kew in London, we have a letter in the hand of later Lord Shiel, but Sir Justin Shiel, who was at the time, talking about the execution, the martyrdom of the Bab. And he talks about the Nehru's upheaval. And it's all in his own handwriting, and it's addressed to Lord Palmerston, Secretary of State. And Lord Palmerston wrote back in his own handwriting. He didn't have secretaries or typewriters or anything. So the number of letters which would have been sent in a year to France by the French consul was not masses, but they would routinely translate them. And they didn't regard this as a nuisance, because one of the things they wrote, of course, was reports of what was happening in the Ottoman Empire or in their part of the Ottoman Empire. And they would routinely write those into French. So it wasn't regarded as unusual. So that was the normal way. And it was the same with the letters to Queen Victoria. So once they arrive in at the capital, I don't know how Napoleon III did it, but I'll give you 2 other monarchs as examples. if you go back to Philip II of Spain, which is a couple of hundred years earlier, 300 years earlier, he was such a fusspot that he insisted on reading every single bit of correspondence that came in himself. So much so that the Spanish governor of Naples said, if death came from, I wish death came from Spain, because we'd all live a very long time, because it would take the king a long time to write a reply to this. Queen Victoria, on the other hand, and certainly Queen Elizabeth, recently passed away, every day would meet with the secretary for about 2 hours. And Queen Victoria would have said, the secretary said, well, I've got this letter, got that letter, got the other. And in the case of Baha'u'llah, if she in fact said, if it's of God, it can do no harm, then what she would have said, because we know this from people who've been secretaries to Queen Elizabeth and people who've been secretaries to Queen Victoria, she would have said, please read me that one. You know, if it was a routine, she'd say, oh, well, send His Majesty my best and ask about how little Rupert is getting on and so on. But it's something really interesting. She would say, could you please read me that one? Or could you pass me that one and I'll read it later? So it may seem strange that the monarchs often read these things themselves, but they did. What I don't know, and obviously some of you are of Persian descent, is I don't know whether the same people who killed Bardi for trying to provide a letter to His Majesty the Shah would then have passed this letter on to the Shah. So my suspicion is that the Shah of Persia never received the letter, but I have no idea. But in more bureaucratic Western countries, they were expected to deal with correspondence, whether it was dealt with according to a well-established formula, but more normally, they would take it to the monarch and they would give them a list of what was there.
Thank you so much. Perfect response.
Too long a response, sorry.
No, it was great. Perfect.
Shala.
Yes, what fascinates me about these letters reaching even those countries is that here we have a Persian prisoner in the Ottoman Empire in a town sending letters to the consulate translating it, sending it to the country, and it's actually reached those rulers. And here we are over 110 years later. We are trying to trace. I'm wondering if we can actually, maybe in the near future, trace exactly how Baha'u'llah handed it to whom and how it got to the consulate and who in the consulate translated it and how it actually reached those countries and how long it took, because majority of them were in good shape when they got it. It didn't take like years.
No, that's right. Being a lazy man, I will just drop a line to Jan and ask him if he knows or where he suggests I look. And I may have an answer for you. But yes, I mean, that shows the power of God, doesn't it? And
yes,
says,
and not only we should study these letters, because I think they absolutely are perfect reminder to us that everything that Baha'u'llah said came to pass. It's just fascinating.
Absolutely. Who else, how can people explain these things otherwise? I mean, none of you are old enough to remember the First War, but in 1917, the German army in France started a counterattack and pushed the Allies back. And the Shiite clergy read the tablet to the Hohenzollern, to William I of Prussia, in the mosques to show, look, Baha'u'llah said he was, you know, that the Germans were going to get zapped, and here we can see they're winning. And then, of course, when the Americans came into the war and the Germans collapsed, then the Ayatollahs and Grand Ayatollahs and Ahuns and all that just looked like idiots because they had themselves advertised this stuff. And I think you've got to remember, you know, Baha'u'llah says, if you try to put out this light, they try and put out this light, it will raise its head in the midmost ocean, you know. And also remember the fame when Abdu'l-Baha came to the West. He was on the front page of many newspapers. The Baha'i faith was certainly more well known by ordinary people in the West then than it is now. When General Allenby took Haifa, which is still celebrated in the Indian Army as the greatest ever victory they've had, they have Haifa Day, which they celebrate on the anniversary in the Indian Army. He sent a message to the British War Office which said, have today taken Palestine, notify the world that Abdu'l-Baha is safe. You know, even the people who were supposed to be Baha'u'llah's jailers actually, as I said, went soft on him. There were families who were descended from the captain of the guard. There were families descended from the doctor that was to look after him and so on. You know, most of these people would have turned a blind eye if Baha'u'llah said, I want this letter to go to the consulate. The only way the Ottomans were able to turn the screw again would be to dismiss a governor and send a new one. And in about a year or 2 years, that guy also had gone soft. Aniela, Aniela, Khanum. Senora, you had your hand up, I think.
Unmuting is helpful. I was mid-paragraph. I am engrossed in this, but I'm thinking Abdullah is gaining great prominence. The Baha'is in Akka are beloved by their jailers. Baha'u'llah can do anything he wishes. I'm wondering if Abdullah is delivering these to the consulate. Just a thought. We'll wait for your dear friend who you efficiently, not lazily, will email. I can't wait to hear his answer. You know, what occurs to me is that these are written to the rulers of the world, and we are the emissaries of the Blessed Beauty. All of this applies to us too. If we can't look at it, each of these letters from multiple lenses, we will be bereft as physicians, and I'm speaking as spiritual physicians. We also will be bereft of our own capacity as lower nature or higher nature beings. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, madam. I think I've exhausted your guests, Ruth.
No, Steve, I have a question for you, and I'm sure others have questions. I know you want to leave. That's why you say all these things.
No, it's not that. No,
It's true. It's true. He does want to leave.
I'm happy to pontificate as long as you like.
We are
But
so happy.
Yes, my question is, do you know that any of these tablets or letters of Baha'u'llah, which has been sent to the rulers of the world, have we had access to any of them? I mean, have we found them? Is it in the archives, or have we been able to trace it?
I haven't chased them because, of course, my principal work was always in education. It's only now I'm in my dotage that I'm putting more effort into studying the faith. The person whom I know of who has done most work of these is it Dr. Varman or something like that? It's a chap in
Yes,
Denmark
Dr. Bahman, correct.
of Persian descent. And yes, so the first answer is that, for instance, the one to Queen Victoria is in the Public Record Office, and when we had a display, the British Museum and the Public Record Office brought out a lot of Baha'i letters which are filed there and put them in glass cases for the public to see for the one of the centennials. But what Dr. Varman has done is he's had access to Russian and Ottoman. Hamid, how are you?
He tried really hard to be here to say hi to you.
Well, he is one of my oldest friends. I don't mean to say friend. No, that's not right. He's a friend of long standing.
Thank you.
He's still young at heart. The point he makes is that the Ottoman records of the letters they sent to that they received from the Persian civil service, if you like, were obsessed with what has Baha'u'llah been saying about us. You know, the Persians realized that actually by transferring the Blessed Beauty to the Ottomans, he's out of their control, and they're worried that he might be saying bad things about the Persians, which he isn't really at all. You know, his letter to the Shah is full of expressions of love to the Shah. It's just that probably the Shah never got to see it. But it's amazing how much they fretted. You know, they realized that for some reason they maybe couldn't fathom, he was influential. And so, yes, a lot of these things will come out. The Russians also have always been and remain absolutely obsessive documenters. Everything that's ever been sent to any Russian Tsar or subsequent General Secretary of Communist Party since they've been able to read is still stashed away somewhere.
We
Because
can say nice
it's the
things
nature
about
of the
anybody.
society. Sorry, forgive me.
I was just making a joke that we can say nice things about anybody.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, one of the things, if you look at the trials, Nuremberg trials of Nazi people involved in oppressions and concentration camps at the end of the war, the whole system was made that much more effective because as a society, Germany also was a country which documented everything. So the prosecutors had available to them lists of thousands upon thousands of people who had been sent to the gas chambers and so on. Whereas more disorganized oppressive countries tend to hide facts. But I have no doubt that the vast majority of these letters will be, even if we haven't found them yet, will be in good order. And we've had here, I don't know how it is in Canada or indeed in Trinidad, although Abdu'l-Baha never went there. But the place where Abdu'l-Baha spoke most frequently, in Edinburgh, just happens to be preserved as a Georgian house because with Edwardian style, with the same kind of furniture that was there when Abdu'l-Baha was there, because it is the headquarters of the National Trust for Scotland. Of course, it wasn't when Abdu'l-Baha went there, but basically it is kept purely because the National Trust for Scotland want it to be a good example of such a house. It's kept as it was when Abdu'l-Baha was there, purely fortuitously. We thought here in Oxford that the place where Abdu'l-Baha had spoken had met with the Reverend T.K. Chain, who was one of the first Oxford academics to declare himself to be a Baha'i. Of course, his relatives then said he'd gone nuts. We thought that that had been knocked over because their big house is now part of the University Department of Engineering. You'll be pleased to know that, Hamid. But in fact, when some of the Baha'is of Oxford researched it for 1987, for the 75th anniversary of his visit to the city, they realized that just that summer, the Chains, because the Reverend T.K. Chain was about to retire, bought themselves a new, smaller house in what's called Summertown, the place where the summer houses were when you weren't at work. And that house is, again, perfectly preserved. We could buy it, we could afford it. And in Bristol, the place where he stayed for several weeks, is now in the hands of the National Assembly and so on. So I dare say, but I don't know, that's the place where he spoke in Montreal and so on, actually somehow have ended up being preserved. I don't know, but I don't think these letters will largely have disappeared at all.
Thank you so much, Steve. Friends, people are thanking you in the chat, Steve. It's been very, very interesting. This evening was very interesting. And next time, even if you're going to be later than this, we will live with it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Friends, if there is no more questions, I'm wondering if tonight we can finish with one or two prayers. It's been a difficult week for me and I'm exhausted. Steve, please go ahead.
I have a special request. Could Hamid please chant to us in Dowry?
Absolutely. He's smiling.
No, a mere blag, Hamid. It's okay.
Unmute
No,
yourself.
that's okay. Allah positive.
Allah
Sorry, I
Akbar.
didn't want to interrupt.
Janabi Farabi.
It's so lovely to see you. Hi, Vicky. If everybody's okay.
They're in fine fettle, thank you. Yes,
Oh,
they're in
wonderful.
fine fettle.
Wonderful.
And both of the kids are probably like yours, somewhere else. Alice is in Brussels, and Tom is in a little place called Chicago, which is in the north of Illinois.
Well, I was going to say a prayer for the departed, for Mrs. Masro, because she lost her brother. And but I don't know that one in Farsi or Arabic. But if you want me to chant, I will chant the prayer. Maybe someone else can say prayer for departed.
That's a better idea.
Just give me a second. I get a nice prayer. It says something from the heart. الهی تو بینا و آگاهی که ملجایی و پناهی جز تو نجسته و نجویم و به غیر از سبیل محبتت راهی نپیموده و نپویم در شبان تیره نامیدی دیدم به صبح امید الطاف بینایتت روشن و باز و در سرگاهی این جان و دل پژمرده به یاد جمال و کمالت خرم و دمساز هر قطره‌ای که به عواطف رحمانیتت موفق بحریست بی کران و هر ذره‌ای که پرتو انوار عنایتت مؤید تابیست درخشنده و تابان پس ای پاکی از دان من این بنده پس ای پاکی از دان من
این بنده پرشور و شیدا را در
این
پناه
بنده پرشور و شیدا را پناهی ده و بر دوستی خویش ثابت و مستقیم بدار و این مرغ بی پر و بال را در آشیان رحمانی خود و بر شاخسار روحانی خویش مسکن و مأوایی عطا فرما.
Here's a healing prayer for the ailing friends. Ya Ilahi, اسمك شفائي وذكرك دوائي وقربك رجائي وحبك مونسي ورحمتك طبيبي ومعيني في الدنيا والآخرة وإنك أنت المطيع العليم الحكيم إنك أنت المطيع العليم الحكيم حسرة بهاء.
He is God, exalted is He. O thou provider, O thou forgiver, this precious soul hath ascended under the kingdom where all things are visible, and hath hastened from this ephemeral dust unto the everlasting realm. He is a guest, newly arrived. Treat him as one of thy dear ones. He is thy veteran servant. Attire him with a new and wondrous robe. O thou who art independent of all things, grant him thy pardon. Confer upon him thy gentle care. Guide him under the sanctum of thy mysteries, and make him thy companion in the concourse of dazzling lights. Thou verily art the giver, the bestower, the ever forgiving, the ever loving, the tender one, the most powerful.
هو الله تعالی پروردگارا آمرزگارا نفس نفیسی به ملکوت شهود صعود نمود و از خاکدان فانی به جهان جاودانی شتاب. میهمان جدید است عزیز فرما، بنده قدیم است خلعت بدیعت کن. ای بی نیاز بیامرز و بنواز و به خلوتگاه راز راه ده و در محفل تجلی همدم و دمساز نما. تویی دهنده و بخشنده و مهربان و تویی آمرزنده و نوازنده و توانا. این
O my God, O my God, verily thy servant, humble before the majesty of thy divine supremacy, lowly at the door of thy oneness, hath believed in thee, and in thy verses, hath testified to thy word, hath been enkindled with the fire of thy love, hath been immersed in the depths of the ocean of thy knowledge, hath been attracted by thy breezes, hath relied upon thee, hath turned his face to thee, hath offered his supplications to thee, and hath been assured of thy pardon and forgiveness. He hath abandoned this mortal life and hath flown to the kingdom of immortality, yearning for the favor of meeting thee. O Lord, glorify his station, shelter him under the pavilion of thy supreme mercy. Cause him to enter thy glorious paradise and perpetuate his existence in thine exalted rose garden, that he may plunge into the sea of light in the world of mysteries. Verily, thou art the generous, the powerful, the forgiver, and the bestower. Abdul Baha.
Steve, will you be able to say a prayer or a last prayer for tonight? Or not? It's okay if you don't have your book with you.
I would love to be able to say a massive great prayer by heart, but I'm afraid I can't anytime. So. But I have plenty of books, as you say.
Okay, that would be perfect. Friends, it's been wonderful to have you, particularly tonight.
Is Niloufar still here?
Who?
Niloufar Niknam. She was here.
Niloufar Niknam. Is Niloufar Niknam here?
Yes, hi. Well, that's one of the books that I packed up to send to you. So there we are.
Okay.
Create in me a pure heart, O my God, and renew a tranquil constance within me, O my hope. Through the spirit of power, confirm thou me in thy cause, O my best beloved. And by the light of thy glory, reveal unto me thy path, O thou the goal of my desire. Through the power of thy transcendent might, lift me up unto the heaven of thy holiness, O source of my being. And by the breezes of thine eternity, gladden me, O thou, who art my God. Let thine everlasting melodies breathe tranquility on me, O my companion. And let the riches of thine ancient countenance deliver me from all except thee, O my master. And let the tidings of the revelation of thine incorruptible essence bring me joy. O thou, who art the most manifest of the manifest, and the most hidden of the hidden.
Stephen, you're an angel. Man, we've been with you
You're just very, you guys are just very
step of the way.
I know Stephen for 51 years.
Oh, Stephen looks like much younger than that.
But he was a
How does Hamid, of course?
he was a succulent.
We both had hair. In fact, at Hamid and Kathy's wedding,